Well, you may not know this. Today is the Holocaust Remembrance Day, where Israelis come to a 2-minute standstill as sirens pierce the air in remembrance of the 6 million Jews killed in the Nazi Holocaust during World War II. It marks the solemn anniversary of the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943. To help explain this and to help us understand the observance, we are joined in our studio by senior editor of Tower Magazine, Ben Cohen. Hi, Ben. Nice to meet you.
How you doing, David?
So we know that this marks this uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto, but tell us a little bit more about the history around which this day remembers.
Well, this is a very solemn day. It's a day of reflection, and it was created in 1953 in Israel to remember the slaughter of 6 million Jews that had taken place only in the previous decade during the Nazi occupation and the Nazi violation of Europe. So you had 6 million Jews from all over the continent, from France, from Germany, from Poland, from Russia, from Romania, all of whom were shepherded into concentration camps and exterminated. And given that the State of Israel emerged from the ashes of the Holocaust, it was only right that you had this commemoration. And so Yom HaShoah, Shoah is the Hebrew word for Holocaust. It actually means whirlwind or catastrophe. There isn't really an English equivalent. But Yom HaShoah, in some ways, underlines the next chapter in Jewish history. We had this annihilation, we faced this genocide, then we rose again with a sovereign state.
Can you help us understand how this remembrance is different than the Holocaust Memorial Day, which is in January, on January 27th?
Yeah, there's a lot of different Memorial Days. January the 27th is actually the International Holocaust Memorial Day, and that commemorates that January 27th was the day that the Auschwitz concentration camp was liberated. This one is done slightly differently. It's based on the Hebrew calendar, and it normally falls around the time of Passover, which we've just celebrated in the Jewish calendar, which again is a festival of freedom. So you know, there are mixed feelings here. You're remembering a story of freedom, but you're also remembering the worst atrocity that the Jewish people have faced throughout their history.
You know, beyond the very common sentiment, you know, those that do not know the past are doomed to repeat it. Why is it important to pause and have this remembrance?
I think there's two reasons, and they fall into rather two categories. One is universal and one is particular. I think in terms of the universal lessons of the Holocaust was not the first genocide of the 20th century, and it wasn't the last. And frankly, genocide, sadly, disgracefully as a phenomenon, is still with us. When we look at what Islamic State is doing in Iraq, particularly to Christians, to the Yazidi religious minority, we realize that civilization has not necessarily progressed very much since the dark days of the Nazis. So I think Holocaust Remembrance Day is a time for us to remember that genocide as an instrument of policy is something that should no longer be tolerated. I think on the particular side, for Jews, obviously, this is a time to sit down and remember what happened to us. It's a day that is, I think, for most Jews, deeply personal, because most of us had family who perished. But it's also a collective commemoration as well.
So, of course, you know, the Holocaust happened because literally the world looked away, did not pay attention, refused to acknowledge. And I wonder, are you concerned that we see that happening again? You mentioned some of the genocide that is happening around the world, even today, certain countries in Africa as well. Do we have the potential for certainly not an atrocity the size of the Holocaust, but something equally as tragic that we're looking away from right now?
I think we're looking away right now from what's going on in Syria, where you have nearly half the country has been dispossessed by a terrible civil war, and you've had all sorts of appalling acts, mass graves, mass rapes. All those appalling atrocities that we associate with the Second World War are still emerging in conflict zones around the world. I think from a Jewish perspective, frankly, the fear of, it may seem a strange thing to say in this era when there is a sovereign Jewish state, the State of Israel, but I think there is still a fear that annihilation was not so long ago, 70 years ago. And I think many Israelis, for example, are looking at what's happening with Iran, and they're looking at its nuclear program. And they're saying, well, you know, here we are gathered in our own state, but if Iran gets nuclear weapons, we don't know what they're going to do with them. We potentially face another annihilation. And those emotions are rising to the surface at the same time that you have, unfortunately, a resurgence resurgence of anti-Semitism around the world, and particularly in Europe.
You have read my mind. That's what I wanted to ask you next. There certainly has been a resurgence of anti-Semitism 70 years after the end of World War II. Why? Why do you think this is happening now?
Well, you know, it's hard to boil it down into one particular reason, but I think that what has happened, particularly in Europe, is that the conflict in the Middle East has spilled over onto the streets of Europe. So these old themes that never really left Europe about Jews, you know, that they're dishonest, that they're disloyal, that they control the media, they control the banks, all these old discredited themes have been revived in this new guise of anti-Zionism. So Israel has become the collective Jew, if you like, and Israel has become the focus of so many demonization campaigns.
Ben, let me ask you very quickly before I have to let you go. Is there a current concern among young Israelis, young Jewish people around the world that perhaps they don't have the connection to the loss of the Holocaust that a generation before them would? I say this because there's a concern in the African-American community that the young black folk today don't understand the sacrifice that was made by their predecessors during the civil rights. Is there that similar parallel concern that the importance is being lost as new generations come along?
Absolutely, there is that concern. I think every year that goes by is another year where we get further from the Holocaust and memories fade. The Jewish community has invested a lot in Holocaust education. I think amongst Jews themselves, there's certainly an awareness of the basic facts that 6 million, and you know, we have to deal with Holocaust deniers as well. So in a sense, we reinforce it by repeating these basic facts. But you know, where we'll be 10 years from now, I wouldn't like to say. The memory is fading.
Yeah, the education and the passing on of that information is so important. Ben Cohen, very nice to speak with you. Thank you very much. And this is Arise America.